She dialed 911 to stop a backyard hangout. But what she triggered was a federal investigation into herself. It started with one phone call. A 911 dispatch from a woman standing behind her lace, curtained window, gripping her cordless phone like it was a grenade. Her voice was steady but soaked in judgment. Yes, operator, there are two men in the backyard next door. They're acting suspicious, possibly armed, possibly dangerous. That backyard. It was my private cabin retreat, 40 miles from the city, a place I bought with my own earned stripes after 14 years in Swate. And that second, suspicious male, just my old teammate Marcus. Retired like me, sipping iced tea with a twisted knee from a 100 training accident. No weapons, no yelling, no threats. Just laughter, old stories, and the smell of fresh cedar planks I'd been stacking since sunrise. But Eleanor, our OA president turned self-deputized neighborhood spy, didn't see two veterans catching up. She saw criminals. The first I knew something was off a drone. It hovered above my shed, buzzing like a digital hornet, getting close. Too close. Marcus looked up, squinting through the sun. That yours? Not unless it's dropping off pizza, I joked. We both knew what it meant. Someone was watching, recording, building a case that didn't exist. Yet, 2 hours later, I got the call. Not from Eleanor. Not from the HOA. From dispatch. Jake, you're listed in a weapons trafficking report. Filed anonymously. We need to talk. A weapons trafficking. The kind of charges that don't just ruin reputations. They destroy lives. And I knew exactly where the report had come from. You see, Eleanor's always had a clipboard in one hand and a smartphone in the other. Last fall, she called code enforcement on a neighbor for painting their door blue. Spring. She fined an elderly couple for growing tomatoes in Common View. But this was different. This wasn't about lawns or fences. This was about me. And what she didn't realize, I wasn't just any resident. I had friends in very high places. The next day, I activated a few of them, not to intimidate, not to retaliate, but to quietly, legally turn the cameras around. Within 48 hours, we had Eleanor's call logs, her drone registration, her private Facebook group, safe neighborhoods for our children, where she'd been posting screenshots, license plates, even zoomed in faces of residents she didn't approve of, including Marcus, a black veteran, tagged as unidentified individual with potential gang tattoos. He had a Purple Heart. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. This was targeted harassment. This was racial profiling. This was warped control in the name of community safety. And then came the twist none of us expected. While digging into Eleanor's surveillance patterns, one of my federal friends stumbled across a missing persons bulletin. The boy in the poster, Eleanor's son, reported missing by his own grandparents years ago. Suddenly, the question flipped, who really had something to hide? Because I wasn't the one under investigation anymore. Eleanor was. And the more we pulled, the darker it got. I stared at the footage Eleanor had been collecting. Camera angles from inside her home, the street, even drones flying overhead. She was watching everyone. All the time. This wasn't just about me anymore. Eleanor had recordings of multiple neighbors, timed entries and exits, deliveries, even kids walking home from school. And the craziest part, she had handwritten notes on every single clip, cross-referencing license plates, timestamps, faces. Like she was running her own NSA. Jake looked at me, then at the board on her wall. That's me. That's my truck from last week. She had his movements tracked for 3 months. I asked, who's this one? pointing at a photo of a woman taped near the top. Red string stretched from her to various locations on a crudely drawn map. Jake's voice was quieting. "That's my wife." The realization hit us both. Jake's wife had gone missing a year ago. The case was cold, but Eleanor had a full log of her last known movements. This woman, who called 911 because we were having a quiet conversation, had answers. We pulled back a curtain and found a steel door behind it. Locked. Keypad. Jake kicked it in. Inside of the room, soundproofed. Monitors, voice recorders, old tapes, VHS, USBs, hard drives stacked to the ceiling. And something even worse, evidence bags, with case numbers. Some labeled with initials that matched open investigations in 3 counties. Jake picked one up. His hands shook. This was my wife's scarf. That was the moment it became real. No longer just a petty HOA grudge. This was evidence tampering, illegal surveillance, possibly obstruction of justice. I stepped back and called it in. Not the local sheriff. Federal task force. We needed backup. As I spoke, I noticed a blinking red light under one of the monitors. Live transmission. A Jake. I whispered. She knows we're here. Sirens began echoing in the distance. Not police, ambulance, and a fire truck. Diversion tactics. I stepped outside and saw Eleanor on her porch, calm, sipping tea. She mouthed 2 chilling words. Checkmate. Commander. She had anticipated everything, except one thing. We had her tapes. And I had the kind of clearance that makes people disappear for less. Back inside, Jake found a journal. Eleanor's own writing. Confessions, names, logs, and a list titled Final Moves. Jake's name was circled in red, then mine, and beside think the word, neutralize. I looked up and said, "We need to move, now," but it was too late. Smoke began pouring from the surveillance room vents. A fire. Controlled. Deliberate. She was burning it all. Jake and I barely escaped. The fire department arrived, but the room was already ash by the time they broke through. And Eleanor, gone, vanished into the crowd. Only one thing remaining, the scarf. And one USB Jake had tucked into his boot before we ran. The screen flickered to life when we plugged it in back at my place. Password locked. Jake stared at the screen, then typed one word, Connor. It opened. Videos played. Footage from her own house. Conversations. Meetings. One with a man in a sheriff's uniform. Another with a city councilman. They were planning something. Zoning plans. Evictions. And payouts. This wasn't just HOA tyranny. It was a conspiracy. And Eleanor, she was at the center of it. The last clip was dated just 5 days ago. A man, Jake's wife's brother, arguing with Eleanor on her porch. Then a scuffle. Then silence. That man hadn't been seen since. Jake's voice cracked. "She's killing people, man, and covering it with paperwork and protocol." I sat down, my badge in one hand and my resignation letter in the other. This wasn't going through normal channels anymore. This was personal. We were going to take her down. But first, we had to find out what Eleanor was hiding inside that abandoned HOA clubhouse she visited every Thursday night, and why it had security tighter than a military depot. Whatever was behind those doors, it was bigger than any of us imagined. And it all started with a 90-1 call because we had a quiet cup of coffee in a cabin yard. Walked into the HOA meeting hall like a man stepping into a courtroom, with every eye trained on me. Except this courtroom smelled like potpourri and control. Eleanor stood at the front of the room like a judge, jury, and executioner. She didn't know I'd brought my own evidence. And she definitely didn't know the FBI was watching from the back row. "You're not welcome here," she barked. I smiled. Oh, I think I am. Behind me, two federal agents stood silently. The entire room shifted. Now, Eleanor looked like she was on trial. Over the past week, I'd helped agents piece together a string of anonymous reports connected to her address. Noise complaints, false 911 calls, even missing persons tips. All sent through spoofed numbers. All linked to HOA security footage stored on her personal cloud server. That was the crack in the foundation. Turns out, Eleanor had access to every resident's Ring cameras through a security sync. Programmed the AOA launched Ed without consent, and she'd been using it to watch, to report, to control. But that wasn't the worst part. Agent Rivera stood up and calmly announced, Eville, we have reason to believe an individual reported missing 2 years ago was last seen entering this woman's home. Eleanor Richards. A gasp exploded around the room. Eleanor froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then she did the one thing that confirmed everything. She ran, straight out the side door. That's when the real SWAC team moved. Not mine. Theirs. I watched as Eleanor was pinned outside, handcuffed under the HOA welcome sign she had installed. Neighbors filmed. Some clapped, or some cried. Her son, Matt, he wasn't there. Turns out, he'd been relocated by Eleanor after one of his friends threatened to go public with what they'd seen in the house. It took days, but the missing boy was found, alive, silent, but safe, and Eleanor. She faced charges for obstruction, unlawful surveillance, and filing false reports. But the biggest punishment, everyone saw her for who she really was. Weeks later, I returned to my cabin. It was quiet, peaceful. No more strange cars parked outside. No more drone buzzing. And no more Eleanor peeking from behind the bushes. Just me, my dog, and the friend she tried to turn into a criminal. I sat on my porch, sipped my coffee, and smiled at the woods. Sometimes, the loudest people fall the hardest. And sometimes, justice doesn't come with a bang. It comes with silence and handcuffs.